Hello. Today we're going to begin our discussion of memory. For me, memory is a fascinating topic. I hope you will find it to be as well. I never cease to be amazed at how our memory works. We have a life experience, or we otherwise learn something new, say through reading, and whatever it is that occurred may be stored in our memories, sometimes for the rest of our lives, depending upon what kind of memory we're talking about. How is this possible that life experiences of various kinds can cause these permanent memories to be created and stored in our brain? To me, this is just another example of the wonder of God, the Creator, that He made us in this way that we can have these amazing memories that serve us so well in so many ways. I wanted to tell you about an interesting case starting out, and we'll come back to this case later. It's of a man named Henry who, in his 20s, fell and injured his head. After that happened, he started having seizures, really bad ones. This happened back in around the 1950s, and doctors weren't really sure what more they could do to help control the seizures. They tried various things and nothing seemed to be working. So they decided to do brain surgery on him. And in the brain surgery, they ended up removing a big chunk of the inside of his temporal lobe on both sides of his brain, where the hippocampus is located. To get an idea about where they went in the brain, to do this, put your fingers over your ears and go in about 2 inches. And that's where your hippocampus is located. We studied the hippocampus in chapter 2, and it's sort of shaped like an upside down seahorse. After they removed the hippocampus from HM's brain, not really knowing what the hippocampus did at that time, they were just trying to stop the seizures. He was not able to form certain kinds of new memories. If you met him in the morning and you met him again in the afternoon, he wouldn't remember that he met you that morning. If you taught him some new factual information, he couldn't remember it. He could remember things that happened before his hippocampus was removed, but he couldn't make those kinds of new memories after the removal of his hippocampus. Yet they had these training sessions with him where they taught him how to trace a star while looking in a mirror. It's not the easiest thing to do because the mirror image reverses what you're doing, but he learned how to do it and he got better at it day by day. Yet when the researchers asked him, how did you learn how to do that? He couldn't tell them because he could not remember the experiences of learning how to trace the star. This is a fascinating case to me. It's probably the second most famous case in all of neuroscience, the most famous case being the case of Phineas Gage that we learned about in chapter 2. And like I said, we'll come back to the case of Henry Molaison, or the case of HM as he's known in the literature, later on in our discussion about memory. One way of gaining a better understanding of memory has been to apply an information processing model. It really is a kind of a computer model applied to the brain in an effort to better understand how memory works. Here's a definition of memory. Memory is the persistence of learning over time through the encoding, storage, and retrieval of information. The persistence of learning over time through the encoding, storage, and retrieval of information. We could consider encoding, storage, and retrieval to be three processes of memory. Encoding involves getting the experience into our brain. Storage involves storing the memory in our brain. And then retrieval involves pulling up the information at some later time when we need to use it. And as we were saying, an information processing model helps us to compare memory to a computer's operation. You can think about when you are, say, working on a paper. You have a software program that allows you to work on that paper, and then you want to save your paper to your hard drive. You can think of your hard drive as being like the storage part of memory. If you've written your paper, but for some reason the power goes off and you don't have autosave engaged on your computer and you lose the whole paper, oh my goodness, that's probably happened to all of us at one time or another. Very frustrating. But you weren't able to store it. And if you can't store it, then of course you cannot retrieve it. So the idea here is that our human memory works in a similar way when we think about memory from an information processing model perspective. So once again, then, encoding involves getting information into our brain's memory system. Storage involves retaining the encoded information over time. And retrieval involves getting information out of memory storage. In the case of HM, he was able to remember things that he had learned before his surgery. He just wasn't able to make new memories. So one of the things that taught brain researchers, and it teaches us too, is that the hippocampus is not where memories are permanently stored. If they were, when his hippocampus was removed, he would have forgotten everything, including things that happened before his surgery. But he could still remember things that happened before his surgery. He was just unable to make certain kinds of new memories when his hippocampus was gone. Where were those memories stored that he could still remember? Things that he learned and remembered before the surgery took place. This is a question we'll be answering eventually. Atkinson and Shiffrin have developed an information processing model of memory that is very popular. With their model of memory, they say that we have three what they call stages of memory: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory involves seeing things and hearing them. Right now, you're using your sensory memory to take in what's being presented in this presentation. But you're also going to be using your short-term memory, and that involves keeping something in memory long enough that you can pay attention to it. You can encode short-term memory through your rehearsal, where you think about it or tell yourself about it over and over again. It's not the same thing as long-term memory, though. In order for you to be able to remember things that you're learning about right now, so that at a later time you could recall this information if you needed to, you would need to get memories of this experience that you're having right now stored in your long-term memory. And then at a later time, you could recall this information and use it in whatever way you needed to, say to answer a question on a test or explain how memory works to another person, that kind of thing. If someone were giving you a phone number to remember, they would say the phone number to you, and you might have to repeat it over and over in your mind a couple of times before you could dial it or else put it in your phone. So you're going through a process of encoding the information through rehearsal. Rehearsal means you say it over and over to help you eventually maybe store it in your own long-term memory so you could recall it without having to look it up. And you might also be storing it in your phone's memory so you could recall it that way in the future if you hadn't committed it to your own personal memory. Thinking about sensory memory for a moment, visual and auditory sensory memory, visual sensory memory is called iconic, like an icon, computer icon that you can see, a little symbol. And auditory memory is called echoic, like an echo in a cave. Visual sensory memory lasts less than a second. To appreciate that, all you need to do is blink your eyes. During that moment when your eyes are blinked, it goes dark. It happens so quickly that we're not even consciously aware of it, but it just shows how brief sensory memory is, visual. And auditory sensory memory is also brief. It only lasts about 2 to 3 seconds, and then it's gone. In recent years, Atkinson and Shiffrin have updated their memory model a bit to where they've expanded their understanding of short-term memory. Short-term memory, when we're using it either to keep something in our memory longer that we're just learning, or to recall something from our long-term memory that we stored there. When we use our short-term memory in these two important ways, according to Atkinson and Shiffrin, we are using our working memory. So working memory is short-term memory when it's doing a job for us, either helping us to retain new information or recall stored information. Another way of thinking about memory is that we have a two-track memory system. One track is conscious and the other track is unconscious. The unconscious memory track that we have is referred to as implicit or non-declarative memory. It involves memory for skills that we learn, like how to ride a bicycle, for example, and classically conditioned dissociations, say fearing an object because of something bad that happened in the past that you associate with that object. These kinds of memories are ones about which we don't really have conscious awareness. We're just able to do certain things because we've learned them uh, through a muscle memory kind of process, and or because of classical conditioning that has taken place. So we just react sometimes in some situations because of learning that occurred before, and automatically we didn't necessarily want to feel a certain way when we're in a certain situation, but we do because of some kind of prior learning that has occurred. Explicit memory, on the other hand, is on the conscious track. It's also called declarative memory. And this includes memory for factual information. Another word for that kind of memory is semantic memory, semantic. And it includes memory for life events. Memory for life events is also called episodic memory. In other words, you're remembering episodes that have occurred in your life. If I were to ask you, for example, what are the 5 components of classical conditioning, unconditioned stimulus, etc. If you've learned that already and you've stored that in your long-term memory, you could recall that information. And if you did, you would be using your explicit declarative memory. It's called declarative because you can declare the answer. Implicit memory is called non-declarative memory because you don't declare something, you just do it. If you walk out of a room, you just get up and you do it. You don't have to teach yourself how to do it. You already know how to do it. You don't have to recall how you learned how to do it. It's just something you automatically do. The other kind of explicit memory is memory for life events or episodes that occur in our lives. Some of these events are very vivid, and we can remember them clearly because of their significance to us. If I were to ask you about where you were when your graduation from high school occurred, you could probably recall that. Or if you went to the wedding of a family member, if somebody died, you can probably recall fairly vivid memories about those significant kinds of situations. And if you did, you would be using explicit or declarative memory for that purpose. As it turns out, implicit and explicit memories are stored in different areas of our brain, processed and stored. And we're going to have a chance to learn a little bit more about that. We might say a little bit more about automatic processing that occurs in implicit memory and effortful processing that occurs in explicit memory. Automatic processing of memories, it just takes place without us having to think about it. It's unconscious. We encode information every day on an unconscious level. We're not really aware that we're encoding it, but we are. And things that are well learned, that we've done over and over and over again, are also processed in an automatic kind of way. We don't have to think about it, we just do it. Effortful processing, on the other hand, involves, a kind of encoding that requires attention and conscious effort. An example of this would be perhaps memorizing verses in the Bible or song lyrics. Some of us are really good at that, and it seems to occur with minimal effort. Others of us, and that would include me, need to really work at being able to commit things to memory through an effortful processing approach. In thinking about effortful and automatic processing of memories, we might want to consider further in Atkinson and Shiffrin's model, short-term memory, because it has been found that with effortful processing, we can hold about 7 bits of information in our short-term memory temporarily, giving us the opportunity to encode it into long-term memory possibly, or at least use the information at the time it's encoded into the short-term storage, whether or not it eventually is stored in permanent storage. If you were given a series of numbers to remember and you had to repeat them back, you would be using effortful processing and short-term memory to try to stay focused on these numbers so that you could remember them and recall them. Or say, use a phone number would be another example of that. When we're using our short-term memory in this way, we are using working memory. This kind of memory improves as we grow up and stay strong in adulthood. And you do tend to see some decline in general in working memory capacity in later life, at least for some people. If we're presented with something new, unless we rehearse it while we're being exposed to it, we forget it rather rapidly. Here we see a graph of a study that was done where people had to recall consonants they were presented. And unless they were rehearsing this in their mind as they were learning this, their recall dropped off significantly the longer the delay before they were asked to recall the consonants. If you're attending a college class that's primarily a lecture class, and hopefully you're taking notes that you can then come back to later, your notes are a kind of encoding. And that kind of encoding can help you a lot in eventually being able to learn what you're being introduced to so that you can recall that information later when you need to do so. But what if you aren't taking notes? What if you aren't actively encoding the information? Well, as it turns out, we just forget most of what we hear, even in the lecture, rather quickly, unless we've actively encoded it in some way. Some people like to take notes on their computer and others like to write out their notes. I will just say that researchers have looked at these two methods and actually found handwriting of notes to be more effective in terms of improving retention than using the computer to type out notes. Another way we can enhance our short-term memory is by using chunking. In chunking, we organize information or items into familiar and manageable units. Let's say someone gave you a phone number to remember, and the phone number happened to correspond with somebody's birthday. If you can organize the number along the lines of that birth date, it helps you to remember it. Let's say if the number were 729 654 387, 729 654 387. If you say that number over and over again as it's being presented to you, it can help you to remember it. That's rehearsal. But what if you organize it into chunks? The first three numbers would be one chunk. The last four numbers would be another chunk. That might be a way to help you understand it, remember it better as well. What if you were asked to remember the numbers 1, 4, 9, 2, 1, 7, 7, 6, and you had to recall those numbers? What if you remembered the first numbers as 1492 and the second numbers sequence is 1776? You'd be organizing the numbers into two different chunks, if you will, and it's a lot easier to remember them because they're familiar dates now. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and 1776 is the date of our country's independence. Mnemonics are another way of helping us to enhance our effortful processing strategies. You've probably used mnemonics before. If you have initials that stand for something that helps you to remember it better, or letters that represent the first letter of words in a sentence, that can help you remember things better. These are both examples of mnemonics. Let's say that you were learning music and you were trying to remember the lines on the treble clef. And you were taught every good boy does fine. For going from the bottom up, E, G, B, D, F. And let's say you're learning the lines of the treble clef and you do so with the word face. F, A, C, E. These would both be examples of mnemonic devices that we can use to help us in an effortful way to enhance our memory. That completes this portion of our discussion about memory, and I look forward to talking with you soon about some other aspects of memory. Thank you.